What's going on, guys? Dr. Andrew Fix back for another episode here on the Code. Thank you for tuning in, joining us, however you're listening to this podcast, whether you're driving, you're on YouTube, whatever platform you're listening on. We really appreciate your time and hopping on here. Um, I'm excited to bring Alex Kaminsky back, one of my friends. She has been on this podcast before. I think we were just talking. It was episode 43. She and her sister Rihanna joined us, and we had a podcast conversation sort of all about their background and their little business, Get Real, that they created out of that a few years ago. So if you haven't listened to that one and you want to hear more about their story, go back and check out episode number 43 of this podcast. But Alex and I are going to be diving into adversity and how we get through it, how we work through it, how we stay motivated. So Alex, thank you for hopping back on the podcast and joining me this afternoon.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be back. It's so great to chat with you. And we were just reflecting on the last time that I was on the podcast was with Ree about 2 years ago and how much life has changed since then. So it's really exciting. But I guess just a little bit more about me. I guess I kind of crossed paths with Dr. Andrew and Physio Room back in 2020, and that was basically right at the kind of end of my sister and I both losing like over 100 pounds during the pandemic. So we kind of got connected there. My sister and I then started our own little side business, like lifestyle brand, which is Get Real. And that was super exciting. And then I moved to Florida and kind of had a little experience there and eventually moved back to Denver. So, um, a lot of crazy things happened along the way. And kind of the biggest one um, is that I kind of went through this like crazy, like, I don't want to call it like freak thing, but it's
Yeah.
definitely like what it felt like. I had a like bone tumor, like bone cyst on my tibia. And so that was kind of like this really big, like overtaking life thing that I've kind of been dealing with for the last gosh, coming up on like a year and a half now. It's been kind of a big part of my life. So yeah, just kind of dealing with some unforeseen circumstances and just kind of dealing with the crazy things that life throws at you. So
Yeah. Now, I don't remember off the top of my head, Alex. This is driving me nuts. I don't remember this. What did you decide to name this tibia bone tumor that you had?
I called him Todd the
God,
Tumor.
okay, I was right. I was doubting myself there for a minute. Todd the tumor. And yeah, so it's just to like fill you guys in a little bit on the story is, Alex was having pain in her shin and when we decide to refer folks for imaging, whether that's an X-ray or an MRI or whatnot, like we do that with a lot of thought behind it, right? We're not just trying to refer people for images that we don't think they need, just so that they can just go check every box on the assessment ladder, so that they're not spending unnecessary healthcare dollars and things. Like if we don't think someone needs an image, we're not going to send for it. And however, when somebody has like a bone related problem, sometimes those symptoms are constantly changing. Like one day it'll feel like their calf is really tight, and then one day it'll feel like the front of their leg is really tight. And, they'll have pain more sometimes than other times. And sometimes the symptoms are not just like super clear cut. Like to use an easy example, like if someone has IT band pain, well, they have pain right there on the side of the knee. Usually it's with cycling or running, walking downhill. Um, so, anyways, after Alex had done a little bit of work with us, but she was also spending a lot of time in Florida working with another great practice and great providers down there. We just decided, you know what, we need to go take a closer look at this, and recommended Alex to go get an MRI. And what we were trying to rule out at the time was let's make sure this is not like a stress fracture or something going on with the bone that it's not responding the way that we would expect it to with with the treatments that we're doing. And quite frankly, her story and how these symptoms came to be didn't really sound like a stress fracture or anything to begin with, which is one of the reasons we didn't send for this MRI sooner. And like Alex alluded to, this image came back with, whoa, on our tibia, on our shin bone, we have this tumor that is present. And though with additional testing and things, it seems not to be like a very dangerous thing. It was still something that the physicians and Alex decided like this probably needs to be removed. And when was the surgery?
May 10th,
May
2024.
10th. So, Alex, you've been back in Colorado for a little over 6 months now, and May 10th, so almost 5 months ago, you had this procedure done to remove that. Um, well, I guess what has your experience been like from having that tumor removed from your shin bone, and then the conversations that you had with the orthopedics and things about like what this rehab process is probably going to look like, and then what you've actually experienced compared to what you expected it maybe to look like. Um, how has that been? And I guess, without asking you too many questions before giving you a chance to talk, maybe let's save that for a second. What I guess I want to go back to is sort of like what was going through your head and how were you feeling along the way? Like when you were dealing with these symptoms, you're doing exactly what we would ask a great client to do. Like you're going in for care, you're seeing a high quality office down there in Florida. You're doing the things they ask you to do, but your symptoms are kind of up and down. You're not necessarily having the perfect trajectory of improvement that one would hope for. Like what was going through your head at that time when you were like trying to work through this pain and symptoms that you were dealing with, um, which ultimately then led to more further testing.
Yeah, I mean, the process was really frustrating because it just felt like a hamster wheel, but it felt like a hamster wheel where some days, like I felt like I was making really good progress and I would go like a few weeks at a time and I would seem to be improving. And then suddenly what felt like overnight, symptoms would come back or I would get worse or I would do something that caused pain that wasn't causing pain before. So the whole process was just totally out of whack and like it wasn't linear. There was like we would do dry needling and it would help sometimes and then other times it wouldn't make a difference and it's just like it didn't make sense and then
Yeah.
just kind of looking back at how I was dealing with this issue really for close to a year before we kind of went in to get imaging. And the first question is, well, why did you wait so long? Well, just because of that, right? Where it's like I would feel like things were improving. So I'd
Yeah.
be like, okay, cool, I'm good. And then, I'd drop off a little bit and
Hmm.
oh well now we'll try treating something else or we'll try working on a different part. So it was like this like long process of
Right.
like it's not like I was just sitting there like, oh yeah, like I just don't feel like getting an MRI. Like I felt like I was doing all these different things but it just like wasn't quite like I was hopeful. I was trying and it just nothing was quite getting there. So that's when
Hmm.
we got to the point. Also the fact that like I had this like weird like bump like protruding out of my leg. It wasn't like, extremely crazy, but it was definitely like a noticeable thing. So that was kind of also a hey, maybe this isn't, you know, something that's common.
Yeah.
Um and I think to kind of go into right into your next question there on just kind of the process with everything. And it's it's been really difficult. And I think from the beginning all the way to the end,
Yeah.
because this thing that I was dealing with is not something that's common at all. And so even, I went to get my x-ray. That was the first thing I did was get an x-ray. And he was like, I'm not qualified to like give you advice on this or to tell you what to do. Like you need to go see the orthopedic oncologist. Like that was it's like specialty. He's like, I can't even like advise you on this. So I was like, okay, great. So that's like strike one, like first weird, weird thing. And then
Yep.
through the MRI and the CT scans and, just kind of all of the chaos there and all that, like, there was just like no answers. It was like the first after the x-ray, the next test that I got was a CT scan. And that came back and said, hey, you've got this like lesion thing on your bone, like in medical terms, right? Like all these like fancy words that you have to Google. But essentially it was like, hey, like you might have bone cancer. So I was like, oh my God okay, like whole wave of emotions there. And
Yeah.
then after that, I think it was a couple weeks later, I got my MRI, and the MRI came back and was like, hey, this doesn't look like, soft tissue, like it's most likely not cancer. So it was like, okay, great, but what is it? So
Yeah.
then it's like you kind of like you get some information, but it's like that information like isn't really that helpful.
Right.
So it's just like super frustrating process. And then again, going meeting with the orthopedic oncologist, who's also, the surgeon, like that's what he does. He does like bone tumors and bone cancer and all those things. And, he even was like, okay, well, let's get a biopsy done. Like, let's kind of see what's going on there. And so we did the biopsy and it was like, well, like we don't really know. We know that it's not cancerous, but like other than that, not really sure.
Hmm.
So leading into the whole process of like recovery and the surgery, even, it was like the surgeon's like, hey, like we don't like he couldn't really even tell me what to expect. I was like, what's the timeline? What's the healing process? And he's like, well, it's just gonna be fully just based on like how you feel. And like
Yeah.
if you want to walk, like you can walk. It's not like, you have to wait 6 weeks for the screws to like heal, whatever. Like they just kind of scraped the tumor off the bone. And he was like, hey, like, as soon as you're comfortable to walk, like you can walk. Obviously just no, running impact, like that kind of thing. So I was like,
Yeah.
okay, well, is that going to be days? Is that going to be weeks? Like what does this mean? And for me, I'm a person like that can kind of stress me out a lot when it's like, I mean, maybe anybody, right? When you're like, am I going to be on crutches for 48 hours? Am I going to be on crutches for 3 weeks? So just kind of figuring out like what to expect and how to kind of plan a recovery or, rehab process was very stressful and very frustrating. So there was a
Hmm.
lot of, I don't know. I mean, it's like you're just kind of just taking it one day at a time,
Yeah.
but also just trying to figure out like what's like, it's so hard to like, if you don't know what you're trying to achieve, how are you going to achieve it, right? When you're trying
Hmm.
to set a goal, you're like, if you don't know where you're trying to go, if you don't know what you're plugging in on the GPS, your car
Right.
doesn't know how to get you there. So I think it was, that was like an extremely difficult thing for me to just have to kind of just take it literally day by day and
Yeah.
just roll with it.
Yeah, totally. Because like, how do you know what your trajectory should be? Like you said, if you don't know the destination of where you're going, like you can't drive cars that way, you can't fly planes that way, like you can't get to where you're going if you don't know where you're going. Um, Now, along the way though, what almost always seems to be true in all of these types of stories is that the real lessons learned, the real magic or whatever is in the journey to get there to before you even get to where the destination is, you've gotten the point of why we're going through this, why we're dealing with this. And I used to really hate the phrase that I feel like my grandma was the one that told me this the most, that like everything happens for a reason. And there are still things that happen in my life where I'm like, what's the reason that this is going on? I don't understand. And then maybe years later, something happens where it's like, oh, you draw upon things that you learned from that scenario. But I want to touch on something that you said because, I've dealt with this guidance being given like from the provider side of things, where a lot of times clients are asking us those questions, right? Of like, well, how long will it take me to get back to X, Y, and Z? Or how many sessions is this going to take here in your office? Like, how long do I have to come? And it's so hard to give those answers. Now, we do know generally by like what the book says about tissue healing timelines and things. And like if you broke a bone, how long generally does it take a bone to heal and whatnot? But but people are so individual and people are so unique that it's hard to give just like blanket statements to everybody's unique scenario. So those are probably some of the most difficult questions to answer, and how I think we tend to answer them is based off of just like previous examples of how other people have progressed, and like, well, what I typically see is X, Y, and Z, and we lay out like a general plan of what this is probably going to look like. But what we know is true is so many variables affect those things, like how we're sleeping, the amount of stress that we're under, whether that's work, family, emotional, whatever. How we're feeling and how we're eating affects how our body's going to heal and recover to things. And, what we're doing from a movement standpoint. Some clients, like yourself, tend to be more consistent and compliant with like the homework programs that other providers give you and other clients do not. And we know that that's true. So all those things factor into like, well, how is somebody going to progress? But then back to being like unique, you had mentioned that, some of this process that you've gone through over the past several months is has been frustrating. And one of the things that's was frustrating is, I'm going in for one test and then another test and then another test, but I'm not necessarily feeling like I'm getting a lot of conclusive answers. Like, and I think as much as people want to be unique and have their own story and stuff, like when it comes to medical things, we do not want to be unique. Like you want to be just like everyone else so that the plan is there. And like, if I'm going to have a surgery, I want to have a very, very common surgery that many providers are really good at. Like, I don't want to have something that is so rare that, oh, there's only two people in the country that can do this procedure or something. So, I think that can be a hard thing to go through if you're going through something that like there's not a lot of other people that can relate to the exact same thing. Um, Whereas like if you're having your knee replaced or you're having an ACL surgery or something, well, there's hundreds of thousands, millions of people that have gone through the same thing. And I think it's easier to like lean on and talk to and like have those conversations. Whereas sometimes when you're going through something that is a little bit more unique, you can feel a little alone in that process sometimes.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting one. Like, you have conversations with people and they try to relate to you and they're like, oh, I dealt with this or whatever. And you're like, yeah, but like, just it's just like you just do feel so alone in many ways. And I think that, just having to combat that and just like have a really strong mindset, I think is really important. And it's something that I have worked really, really hard on in the last couple of years, and I think was a really huge thing that helped me a lot during this process, along with, like great support from, the medical side, like yourself and my Florida PT team, and even, the team, my surgical team, and all of them. Like I felt, really comfortable with them. So I think that was, helpful. Like I didn't feel like they made me feel like they didn't invalidate anything that I was
Yeah,
going through. They
right,
just kind of
right.
were like, yeah, like this is pretty weird. Like this is pretty odd. Um, but like I still did feel like everybody was like equipped to handle it and able to kind of help me um kind of overcome it. So
Yeah.
that was good.
Yeah, I think that probably happens to people sometimes where they feel like they're going through something, they're trying to communicate to the providers or to whoever it is. It could be friends, family, medical providers, like what they're going through, and they just feel like nobody's understanding. Like you're not hearing me, you're not listening, or they feel like their comments, questions, or concerns are not being validated fully. I think that is pretty common, and I think honestly, that's one of the reasons I think why the office that we have is structured the way that it is so that we're not really hindered by time or what insurance companies say we can and cannot do in order to care for people. Because so often, like I was actually just interviewing a PT to potentially join our team right before this podcast, and he said that where he lives, which is in another state, it's pretty commonplace for the physical therapist to be working with two, three, four clients at one time. And what we know is if you're doing that, well, you literally only get a few minutes, 15 minutes maybe, of face-to-face time with each client. If you've got like four clients in the office, all for the same hour, and you have an aide that is helping you manage what exercises people are doing, you don't really get to get into deep, legitimate conversations with people and talk about things like this in great detail. So, so yeah, I think that is common for people to feel that. Now, if people do go back and listen to that prior podcast episode that we did, or heard you say at the beginning, like, "Hey, my sister and I each lost over 100 pounds," from gaining weight, losing weight, something like that, like these changes happen very slowly over a like long period of time, right? Like you don't really see a difference in the mirror from one day to the next day, but you look at pictures and you see a massive difference from like 6 months apart or a year apart or something like that. Knowing that that's true, what have you noticed or what's your experience been like from May 10th to now, like when you had this procedure and what you were doing or how limited you were able to be right after the procedure compared to like what are you doing now and what are you like training for or working to get back to now?
Yeah. Well, first I'll preface this with saying that it's been hard. It's been hard physically, mentally, emotionally. It's just been a hard process. But sorry, just totally lost my whole train of thought.
No, that's okay. So physically,
Um,
mentally, emotionally challenging throughout this whole process. And I had asked you like, you know, what were you or like what did it look like on May 10th, May 11th, like right after you had this procedure and like how limited were you? Like what types of things were you and were you not able to do? And then like what are you doing now? And then what are we working towards?
Yeah, so basically, right out of surgery, it was, hey, like you are just going to be in pain and you're going to be on crutches, but as soon as you feel like you can, start putting pressure on or walking, like go right ahead. So basically, like the first 2 days, like I was, just recovering from that surgery and I was pretty much laid up in bed. But by the third day, I was, putting some weight on my leg, taking some steps. I was went to the gym and got a little lift in on day 5. I mean, nothing crazy. Still on crutches and everything, but more to just, get out of the house and do it. And I feel like from there, like I had like a quick burst of progression. Like I feel like after the first week, it was like, hey, like you're starting to walk a little bit. I was walking very, very slowly, but
Yeah.
it was it was fun and it was interesting to kind of be forced to slow down in that manner just for someone like me who just likes to just go go go. So I was walking, I remember I walked around the block and it took like 40 minutes. Normally it would take like 5. So just like slowly 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 walking, and then I went in for my like post-op checkup 3 weeks after surgery. And initially, like the time frame was, hey, like you're not going to be able to do any impact for like 3+ months. Um, and I was like, okay, cool, great. Like I'll just walk and I'll just work on recovering and all that. So I went in for my 3 week checkup, and we did an X-ray and he looked it up and he was like, you're good to go. Like you're clear. Like you have no restrictions. And I was like, whoa. And I don't know if that was necessarily like the best thing for me, because that was like a little bit too exciting of like, hey, like you're good to go. You don't have any restrictions. But also I had to balance that with the fact of like, hey, like you just had surgery 3 weeks ago. Like you're not ready to do these things. Like you still need to
Right.
follow kind of a nice progression. And so um it that was kind of a very difficult part too, was like that balancing game of like how hard do I push myself versus like you need to let yourself recover a little bit. So I definitely overstepped on maybe both ends like
Yeah.
many times, even throughout, even up to even just a few weeks ago. So like I was like itching to get back on the tennis court. So like I went out to like hit a little bit after, I think maybe like 4 or 5 weeks post surgery. And then it was like, okay, because I was feeling pretty good, like pain was pretty low. And then I did that and it was like, okay, like that wasn't a good idea. And like the pain got a little bit worse. So it's like that kind of set me back a little bit. And then same thing, like maybe around like the 3.5, 4 month mark, like most days, like I'm feeling really good. Like there's very low pain level. Like there's not much where, like just on a day-to-day basis, it's like I feel normal. So when you go out to work out or to do things, like you're like, I feel fine. Like I'm not in pain, whatever, I'm good. And so then it's like easy to push it a little bit harder than you probably should. And then, later that night or the next day, oh shoot, like I'm in a little bit of pain. So I definitely had a lot of that. I really had this like ambitious goal of like, okay, I want to start, I want to do like this half marathon, or I want to do a 5K like by, November or whatever. And I was like really trying to push towards those goals because I wanted to progress and I wanted to like, it was almost like proving to myself maybe, or proving to the world, to somebody, I don't know, that like, hey, like 5 months post surgery and like I'm out here. And I don't know too if there's like a little bit of that um like comparison stuff or like, like at the time, it was like on social media and you see like these other professional athletes or whatever, and like they're going through similar things and you're like, wow, like they had surgery and they're back at it in like 5, 6 weeks or whatever. And I was like, well, if they can do that, like, so can I. Like, our bodies are amazing. And I truly believe that. But, um, I was just kind of holding myself to like a really high standard and I like really wanted to progress and to just like do something like really, really big or something that felt really big, just to be like, hey, like screw you, Todd the tumor. Like you didn't hold me back. Like, it's been 5 months and I'm back at it better than ever. But again, then having to, having some hurdles in that process of like, I, shared with many people, I was like, okay, I want to run a half marathon. And then I kind of started
Yeah.
working towards this goal and then was realizing like, hey, like you're probably going a little too hard. I was in a little bit of pain. And then like that just starts this whole frustrating process again of like you think you're progressing and then you start having pain. So I kind of had to really shift a lot. I had to rethink about my goals. I had to think
Hmm.
about why those are my goals. And then I kind of like redrew them a little bit because I was like, why, like really that why on the goals was why am I doing this? And for someone like me, the most that I've ever ran at once, I think is like 6 miles or so. Like I'm not a distance runner. I never, I wasn't consistently running a lot before surgery. So like I sat and thought and I was like, okay, what really makes sense for like is this a realistic goal just with even, who I was without this injury, right? And again, like running a half marathon, like that's, maybe 5 months after surgery, you can do that if you were running half marathons before surgery.
Right.
So that's like I was almost like kind of like making it like double hard on myself for like doing this thing that I've never done before with this like distance running, and then also trying to like balance that with this recovery from an injury. So it was like a lot of the frustration that comes with different parts of this process are like what really make me reflect and dig deep because I fully let myself kind of sit in the suck and I listen to myself and I talk to myself and I reflect and I really try to figure out why is it why is this so frustrating? What's holding me back and what do I need to do to move forward? So that's where I really sat down with, okay, well, my goal is to run a half marathon right now. And then again, I said why is, and then I really dug into that. And then I realized that like this goal is just so arbitrary and it's like it doesn't even like it wasn't even like motivating me that much because for whatever reason, right? And I was like, this is like the like dumbest goal that
Yeah.
just because or whatever, like I'm hanging out with these people who like do this or whatever, and it sounds cool, but I was like, this isn't like making me jump out of bed every day and want to make progressions on like recovering from this injury. So what I kind of did was I kind of shifted back into centering my goals around sport that I actually like a lot better. Not that I don't love running, running's great, right? But again, so before surgery and after my sister and I like lost all of our weight, we picked up tennis.
Yeah.
And that's when we really got into it competitively. I mean, adult competitive tennis, right? But playing in leagues and tournaments and playing 4 to 5 times a week
Yeah.
and winning
Totally.
tournaments, going to national championships. And that was something that going through this whole process was really, really, really difficult for me in many ways. It was my social life. That was a big part of my identity. That was a big part of my physical activity levels. And getting all of that stripped away from you was a lot for me. And not being able to have that, I had to kind of change a lot of things about my life. And that, that through that whole process, I was like, well, maybe I just like just should just take a step back from tennis even after surgery because maybe I just need to like hang up the shoes and call it good. Maybe I just do something else. But
Yeah.
kind of reassessing all that. And I'm like, I love tennis. Like I want to play tennis. I love being competitive. And, I couldn't even go to tournaments or like to watch my sister play without just being so like down and like I just couldn't even like do it. I couldn't even go watch because it just made me feel so like upset. So I was like, well, maybe that's something of like, hey, maybe I actually do really want to get back into tennis. So
Yeah.
that's when I kind of reassessed my goals and I was like, I think this is a goal that will actually motivate me. And I think this is something that actually means something to me and it has a good meaning behind it. So, and that was actually pretty recently. So that was like, gosh, maybe within the last like 3 or 4 weeks that I kind of
Yeah.
like readjusted my path. And it's been going a lot better, I think. Like I'm staying more motivated and committed and it's actually more exciting. So yeah,
This
I just
was
talked for a lot of time there.
No, this is great. I was going to sort of make a joke about how like Alex, maybe you just be the podcast host and you just take it and run with it. I mean, I thought all the stuff that you just talked through, I was making some little notes. Like I think that was great. And I think like how you sort of talked through the process, both physically and mentally, of kind of like what you've been going through and processing. I think there are a lot of little pearls that people can pull from that. And I want to unpack a couple. And you guys hear how Alex said, but I love running. Running's cool because we're going to go meet up at a run club after this that we recently started. But if you were to ask me, um, you know, if someone were to ask me like, well, what things do Ree and Alex really love to do? Well, tennis is going to be the first like sport or activity that I would talk about, and then maybe I'd mention golf or something. But running wouldn't be like the top thing on the list. So I think it's awesome to hear that after doing some, what's the word I'm looking for? Like some thinking and recapping, like, well, why did I make this goal? Who's this goal for? I wasn't running half marathons. Why did I decide I wanted to run a half marathon? Better yet, why don't I go back and play some tennis? And I think that was just an awesome realization. Reflection is the word I was looking for. To like think about those things instead of just making arbitrary goals because we think that's supposed to be what we're supposed to do because of something that we've seen or something we've heard. Um, and yeah, I think it's awesome to hear that that's what's kind of keeping you motivated and like getting you up every day to go work towards getting back to that. Because I think I've gone through some similar stuff with like I've dealt with a lot of Achilles issues over the past several years. And one, we work with a lot of runners in the office. A lot of friends and people that I have are runners. Family members that I have are runners. And I really love to run, but I've not really done much running over the past couple years until the past 6 months or so. I started getting back into it. But over the past 3 years before that, like I was starting to feel kind of the same way. Like I don't know if imposter syndrome is the right word because like I never had like a lack of confidence working with people who are runners or anything like that because I feel confident doing it. But it was like, I want to be out running with them, but I'm not. Or like these people are signing up for races and oh, Andrew, how's your running going? Well, it's not. I'm not currently running because my Achilles is limiting me. Um, so I don't know. I was starting to go through a little bit of like, man, am I ever going to get back to running? Is my Achilles ever going to be at the level where it can tolerate the demands of getting back running? And honestly, it wasn't until I just like decided to go for a run and like test it out and see how it felt that I really, really felt like I knew the answer to that question, or I could like reassess where I'm at until you just like get back to doing the thing that you wanted to do in the first place and see how it goes. Um, One of the things that I really struggle with is slowing down and not being like go 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 all the time or being able to sit without distractions and just like read a book or sit on a beach and just relax. I've never really done much of that in my adult life. Now, I'm gradually getting a little bit better at it, and I think since having Aiden, it is much easier for me to just sit, hang out with him and be just immersed in what I'm doing. But one of the things that you said with, having this surgery and I those first few weeks like you were really forced to have to slow down a lot compared to prior. And I guess what I want to ask you is like now looking back to a few months ago, like what good has come out of that for you? What good has come out of being forced, not choosing to slow down? And like what have you learned about yourself or just in general from having gone through that process?
So this is my favorite question, and I'm so excited to talk about it because, again, like you mentioned earlier, like everything happens for a reason, and like my dad always tells me, like you aren't given things that you can't handle, and it's all, divine timing and all those good things. And I wholeheartedly and firmly believe that I am a 1000% better of a person for having to go through this incredibly difficult thing. And so many good things have come out of it. And that's, I think, the most exciting thing about it. And I think if you can kind of go into any situation just thinking that on the forefront, obviously I know that that's way easier said than done, but just knowing that something good is going to eventually come out of it,
Yeah.
then that's a really helpful point too. So the two biggest things that I think I've taken away from kind of going through this and being forced to slow down is I went like full blown into gratitude and visualization. And by themselves, they're amazing, but together they just kind of make you unstoppable. And I have to give a huge shout out to my mindset coach, Colin Henderson. Um, he's amazing and fantastic, and he kind of helped me get started into this whole thing. And just I kind of just took it and ran with it with dealing with this whole thing. So I mean, gratitude, I think these days is just almost like a buzzword where it's like everyone's talking about gratitude and manifestation and all these things. But I mean, the science behind it, like it's real and it's true.
Hmm.
And I've seen the benefits in my life, and it's really cool. And when you just kind of slowly but surely work towards a more grateful attitude and mindset, you like your whole world just starts to turn around in the best way, even through the worst situations. Like, you know, going through this and the people that I've met through it, or the challenges that I've overcome, or the resilience that I've seen in myself, like amazing. Like I made it through that, or I did that. Like, it's just so great. So, um,
Hey Alex, let me interrupt you real quick. I'm curious because me, you, everyone listening to this podcast, right, is going through stuff, right? No matter what it is, we've all got things that we're dealing with, and I think, like you said, there's so much research out there. There's statistics and things that will show, like, if you can have a practice of gratitude and a practice of visualization, that it does lead to significant impact in terms of like improving things. Um, how have you implemented that? How have you gone about trying to instill that practice? And like, if you could make it maybe a little bit tactical for us, or tell people like, so like, what are you doing to make that happen? That would be awesome.
Absolutely. So it's been kind of an evolving process, which is cool because I think each person kind of has different things that work for them. But for me, the most important thing that I do in my gratitude practice is that I externalize it. And
Mm.
that, so it's every day and it has to be externalized. So for me, that it started out as me sharing on my stories on Instagram every single day what I was grateful for, because I just felt like I was holding myself accountable. I was sharing it. I was putting out, abundance with gratitude and all that. And then I actually kind of quit social media. So I was like, okay, I need to figure out how I want to still externalize this, because I just felt like putting it out into the world somehow is what really just takes it over the top. Like you can sit in your bed at night and think about things we're grateful for, and I think that's amazing, and that's an absolutely great place to start. Um, but for me, my rule is I have to externalize it. So what my process is now that I'm kind of back at desk job, and I've got like a nice desk. I have a notepad, and every morning I write down what I'm grateful for. And I also have a column next to it of just like good things that have happened like during the week. So I've just got that like in the forefront. It's just under my computer, so I can always see it.
Yep.
So I always write it down. And then a bonus is like telling someone
Yeah.
or just saying it out loud what you're grateful for. And my other rule is too that it's like nothing is too big and nothing is too small. It can be literally something is done like sometimes it's just like today I'm grateful for sunshine and that's great. And some days I'm like today I'm grateful for my loving and supporting parents who have gone through hell and back to make sure that I had the best life possible, right? Like it can
Yeah.
be extravagant, but it can literally be so silly. And I think
Mhm.
both of those are really important to just change your mindset and just change like kind of your like almost like rewiring your brain into like
Yeah.
just a positive outlook and seeing the good in everything.
Totally. Well, because we've all been around those people, right? Who, no matter what we're going through, no matter what kind of conversation you have with them, someone that's either like very grateful and very positive versus somebody who is on the opposite end of the spectrum. And we know what it feels like to be around those people. Now, we don't know from their perspective what it feels like to be going through the scenarios that they're going through. But I think there are many times where like you'll meet somebody who is going through a really challenging situation or numerous situations, but they still have like such a positive, grateful outlook on things. And when you talk to them about it, they're not bitching and complaining. They're just telling it like it is and talking about all the good things that are still happening despite these other things that they're working through. And those are like the best people to be around.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I think too, like I gained a really healthy perspective on life
Hmm.
just by going through this whole thing, right? Like obviously I'm so lucky and blessed and grateful that my bone tumor was non-cancerous, but there was about a month span between the time of like that CT scan coming back and then actually finding out that it was like nothing super scary. And that time was like, I mean, just having to like think these thoughts of like what you might be facing and like suddenly my whole perspective on life and the world and everything changed. Like what am I stressed out about? Like what
Yeah.
really matters in life? And this process was kind of like a big driving factor of like even why I moved home of
Hmm.
just it's like so important to me to be around my family and close to my family and just like really understanding what life is about and that, each day is so special and I'm so grateful to just wake up in the morning and like, that was, maybe 6 months ago or whatever. And like I just had my birthday and it's like, the thing with aging is like, oh God, like, it sucks getting older and this and that. And I'm like, I am so grateful that I got to turn 28, 2 weeks ago.
Hmm.
Like, how lucky am I to be able to have gone through another year of my life? So, just
Yeah.
that perspective shift has just been like an absolute game changer for me. And it's like making me emotional even right now.
Yeah, and I think, in me having not gone through the same scenario as you, like I think a lot of times though, it really does take somebody going through something that is fairly large in scale to change that perspective, whether that's like a personal thing or somebody very close to them, or like a near death, near diagnosis kind of experience that like that would change the trajectory of what life looks like going forward. And even the thought of waiting for test results and things to come back, like you're talking about, like it just really puts things in perspective for you. And I think, I've had a few, one of the things that I think people probably associate with me is sports and activities and fitness and stuff, because that's like what I love to do. But there have been multiple times in my life where that, for a temporary period of time, has been taken away from me, whether that was like an injury to my knee in high school wrestling, or that was um, the 5 surgeries that I had to go through while I was in college, or the more recent kind of like Achilles procedure that I had a year and a half ago that now I'm back in a boot and I'm back dealing with this. And it's like, having those periods of time that force you to have to stop, to have to pivot, to shift, to become more creative and come up with other ways to do things. Like I can't tell you how many times, because I do really enjoy and love running, um, that people have told me, well, over the past couple years when I have not been running and I've been doing other things like lifting and biking and hiking, and they've like, well, I don't know how you do it. I don't know what I would do if I couldn't run. And what's probably true, and I don't know this for all those individuals, they probably really haven't had running, quote unquote, taken away from them for a significant period of time. Because I don't know what the time frame is. It's different for everyone, but like if you're forced to have to stop doing something for whatever reason, one, you got to process that and go through that mentally and work through that. But two, at some point in time, you have to come up with other things that you're going to be able to do to fill that void or whatnot.
Yeah.
Like say somebody, for example, to use running again as the example, say someone's in our office and we determine they do have a stress fracture. Well, that is a period where you do have to give up running and you need to stop and you need to be in a boot or you need to be on crutches. But that doesn't mean you do nothing for 8 weeks. Like there's plenty of other things we can do. We can get in the pool, we can lift weights, we can do other things. And it, quite frankly, it would be so much worse for you to not do anything for 8 weeks' time while that stress fracture heals. Like we need to keep doing this other stuff if the goal is to continue to be in shape, to get back to running, to continue to heal from that really well and do the things you want to do. But but yeah, I think it's sort of hard to have that perspective or that mindset if you haven't gone through something
Yeah.
of magnitude. And I think the most relevant example for me as he's being put down for a nap right in the room behind me is like going through the process of becoming a dad has just been so cool. And Aaron and I didn't have like the easiest process. The miscarriage rates are really high, and we had a miscarriage, and then we got pregnant again. And it's this roller coaster of like up and down emotions, like you were sort of talking about.
Yeah.
And then now he's about 7.5 months old, and you know, it's hard for me to have this happen, but there are times where I don't get the things done on my to-do list that I was hoping to do because I'm spending it time with him instead. And quite frankly, if we're going to rank those things, that's way more important. So the
Yeah.
email doesn't get sent or the notes don't get finished or the whatever. And it's hard for me to like not make it through my to-do list and have to like push things off and push things off. But um, when you have that new perspective on like, well, what's more important? Like, well, this is more important. So we're just going to figure it out and we'll get to that when we do. It's really like an interesting change of mindset that I'm kind of going through that too.
Yeah. And I want to touch on the visualization piece as
Yeah, let's
well.
do that.
Yes. So this one has been the most exciting, I think, for me. So again, the research on this is huge. And, if you look at all these like extremely successful people, right? Professional athletes and these amazing people, like they're all doing this. And it's like, why aren't we to be successful in our, average Joe lives, right? Like we can use this power to be better people and be more successful in our own right. So basically the process of visualization is seeing, feeling, believing the things that you want for yourself um, before they happen.
Hmm.
So basically, like my coach says, things happen twice, the first time in your mind and then in real life. And like that process of visualizing, like your brain can't tell the difference between what is real and what's imagined. So if you're walking yourself through the process of like for me, right, going through this recovery of this injury, it was something as simple as like just walking again, right? So it's like the process of just sitting there, closing your eyes, and just imagining yourself, you know, turning to get off the couch, standing up, putting your socks on, putting your shoes on, slowly walking to the front door, opening the door handle, going down the steps, and just picturing yourself taking every single step. Like
Yep.
your brain is registering that as like
I'm doing
reps,
it.
as
Yeah.
things that's
Hmm.
really happened. So it's like using that, through this recovery process, but it could be used in any way, right? It's like visualizing your, job interview before you actually sit in it. It'll help reduce your anxiety because your brain knows you've been there before. Same thing with sports, or you're stepping up to hit a golf shot or whatever you're trying to do. Um, and I think the visualization process can just seem like um, I don't know, like confusing or overwhelming, but it's like it's very simple. And I think it's just really important to think about like it's almost like the law of attraction, and like
Yeah.
what you think about expands, or like what you focus on expands, right?
Yep.
So it's like you have to like really focus on visualizing things that you want, not things that you don't want.
Yep.
And also like you just have to like be extremely detailed in like what you're seeing. Like I just was describing of like picturing yourself going for a walk. Like just you have to get so detailed with it. But I've seen how much of an impact that it's made on my life. And it's really, really cool because I can also tell when I kind of start to slack on it a little bit that, my thoughts can sometimes like get out of whack. And I'm like, whoa, what's going on? It's like, well, have you been, focusing on your gratitude and visualization?
Hmm.
So I think kind of a practical takeaway for that is one is that these things like gratitude and visualization are a skill and they take time to implement and be learned. It's not something that you can just expect yourself to be like really good and you can visualize a whole football game. That's what you're doing, right? Like it's not realistic. So it's the same of building any skill. It takes time, it takes reps, it takes effort, and it takes starting small.
Yep.
So it can literally just be like try to visualize for 1 minute and then you just build and build and build. And that consistency will eventually it'll just become, you're going into a stressful situation. You just take a few seconds beforehand and just like see yourself being successful.
Hmm.
So that was a big thing for me. Through a lot of that process, like just visualizing, just getting, running or playing tennis, like to the point where I literally would start like dreaming about these things. And I was like, that's how I know it's working.
That I know it's working. Yeah, the reps are working. And you're totally right. And the science is there on like your brain does not know the difference between the mental rep or the physical rep of you doing that from a brain standpoint. Obviously, there's a difference physiologically and from like a muscles being used and calories burned and all this stuff, but like from a mental and a processing standpoint, it is the same. And I love what you said about like these things having a practice of gratitude and having a visualization practice. Like these are skills that need to be grown and honed and built upon. Like no one's just going to show up one day and just like sink 20 free throws in a row without a lot of practice and getting good at free throws. Well, you're not going to be really good at visualizing things if you never do visualization practice. And I think using analogies of sports for something like this is really like an easy one because if you listen to people who are being interviewed after they win the gold medal, they win the Super Bowl, they win whatever competition, they all say stuff like this, right? The person doing the interview is like, "Well, how did you know you were going to be able to X, Y, and Z?" And these athletes, these people always will say something to the effect of like, you
I've seen
know,
it 100 times.
I've seen this. I've known I can do this. I believed in my abilities of X, Y, and Z. And the coach puts me in X, Y, and Z situation all the time. Like we knew that this was going to happen because they've pictured it, they've seen it, and they've believed that this can happen. And I think like this is the whole concept, right? Behind like mental reps. Like if you are practicing, like we'll use football as the example because you had just brought it up. Like if you're standing on the sideline and the other 11 players on offense are running a play and you're like a backup, like you need to be taking these mental reps and picturing yourself in whatever position it is that you play, like going through that rep, going through that thing so that you can still get the mental rep of this so that when your time is going to come up, when your number is called upon, like you've done this before. It's not like, oh, now you're starting from scratch and now you need to learn how to do it. Like you needed to be learning all the way along the way in order to jump right into that situation and like not miss a beat.
Hmm.
And watching film and all this stuff. And then, like you said, what you think about, you bring about. And if you know, think about in your head, talk about out loud, believe deep down in your gut that you can't do something or are not going to be able to do something, well, chances are you're probably not going to do that thing because you've never given your brain or your mind like the opportunity to know like what it would feel like to accomplish that because you've
Yeah.
not pictured that. So, whatever the thing is that you're hoping to do, want to do, the partner that you want to find or whatever it is, like that's what you need to have your mind focused on, not on the alternative. And if it's making more money or if it's losing weight or like whatever, like you think about what you want and not what you don't want to happen.
Yep.
And again, using football as the example, like one of the very common scenarios that I'm probably going to be a coach someday of whether it's a football team or a soccer team or whatever, if Aiden or any other kids that we have want to do sports. Um, but one of the things that like often happens at the end of a game, say a team is ahead by a few points and they are trying to run out the clock. The other team is trying to strip the ball away and force them to fumble so that they can get it back and go score. And sometimes what coaches will say to the running back or whoever is going to be carrying the ball is, whatever you do, don't fumble. And that's like the worst thing that you could say because then what they're thinking about is like fumbling the football. But what you
Right.
need to say is the opposite. Like, what do you want them to do? Hold on to the ball, right? Like, squeeze the ball or like whatever, something about what the outcome you actually want to happen, not what you don't want to happen. So don't think about what you're trying to avoid. Think about what you're trying to have happen. And chances are more likely that it's going to happen.
Yeah. And just
Yeah, I love
even
that.
little things too. Like, I was actually just spending some time in Nashville with my mindset coach, long story. But, I mentioned something about how I, I'm not good at organizing this, whatever. And he's like, don't put that out into the world. Like, don't even say it out loud. So that's something like I know a lot of us can kind of have maybe it's like a sarcastic kind of thing of like self-deprecating, whatever. But it's like I stopped doing all of that. I stopped making those comments like to myself. Like it just like doesn't happen. Like
Yeah,
because it's just like negative, even if it's like a joke, like it's just not there. Like don't put that energy out
right.
there.
Yeah.
Like,
And yeah, like you said, this is a skill and this takes practice. Like that's hard to do
mhm,
for me, for you, for everyone. Like I think what I needed to learn and still I'm learning is like say you're trying to meditate or you're trying to be present or whatever and like you find that your mind keeps wandering. Like it is okay if that
yeah,
happens and that's
yeah,
going to happen and you have to go into it knowing that that's going to happen. And when it does, just acknowledge it and then work to bring yourself back to what you're trying to focus on or being present or whatever. Or
yeah,
like, if you find yourself going down that path of the negative mindset things, like is okay. That's going to happen to all of us. And then you can acknowledge that and bring yourself back and try to think about something positive.
yeah.
But it's not easy to do. We're not going to be really good at it right away when we start. And but there's a lot of resources out there, and we'll try to include some in the show notes for you guys. So if starting a daily visualization or gratitude practice is something that you think this is the right time for you to work that into your life and your daily flow, we can make that a little bit easier for you. Awesome. Well, Alex, I think this has been great. I mean, I think we could keep talking on this forever, but honestly, I think that might be a great place to kind of wrap this up. And then if the folks that tuned in to listen to this have questions that came up of this or something like that, we can field those and get those to you, or we could record another conversation on this and dive deeper into a particular piece or something. But man, I think this conversation was a lot of fun. Is there anything you think, big picture wise, that we left out or we skipped over?
I don't think so. I mean, it's just um one of the biggest things and one of the things that's the hardest for me is just giving yourself grace.
Hmm.
And I think it's so easy to see other people and see how they're doing a great job and they're pushing through and persevering. And we just tend to be so hard on ourselves. So that's something that I'm really working on. But I think it's also kind of like you mentioned with the visualization, but like it's okay that it's going to be hard. It's okay. Like that's to be expected. One
Hmm.
of my absolute favorite podcasts on Rich Roll is Alexi. I always butcher her last name, but Papas or something. I don't know.
Hmm.
But anyway, she talks about the rule of thirds, and it's like it's applicable to everything in life. Like there's going to be great days, there's going to be okay days, and there's going to be bad days. And if you just have that expectation going into whatever you're doing, life, sport, recovery, work, anything, just having that is like, hey, like, yeah, some days are gonna suck. Okay, move on. Like tomorrow
Yeah.
might be one of those good days.
Yeah.
Um, so just being kind to yourself and just knowing that, the ups and downs are part of the journey, and that's what's gonna those are the things that you're gonna, you know, become a better person from.
Totally, totally. Um, Alex, I wouldn't be surprised if one of the pieces of the story or some of the things that you said in this conversation really resonate with people. If someone was interested in finding you online, reaching out to you after they listen to this podcast, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you online?
So I would say Instagram, I'm at Alex Kaminsky 222. But also, since I'm on a social media break right now, I think email would be the best,
Yeah.
which is so fun to say in 2024. I'm like, wow, it feels so like caveman, but it's super cool. So Al at getrealshop.com is a good email for me. I would love to see emails from somebody. I think that'd be super fun. But I'm
Awesome.
all about super intentional connections and conversations. So, yeah.
Cool, guys. We'll put that in the show notes. Reach out to Alex if you want to talk more about any part of this conversation, or if you want to dive in more into, starting your own gratitude journey or visualization practice. And we would love to hear about it too. As you can imagine, reviews on podcasts really help get this out to more and more people. So if you're listening to this show, whether it's your first time or you've been here for 140 plus, really appreciate you sticking with us to the end of the show. And if you would be so kind to scroll to the review section of whatever podcast platform you're on and drop 5 stars on there, that would be hugely appreciated. Alex, thank you so much for joining me. I look forward to seeing you in a little over an hour. And I hope all the rest of you guys that tuned in to listen to this have an awesome rest of your day. And we'll catch you guys next time on The Code. We'll see you later.